This is part of a series, History, Technique, and Technology of DJs. And today we're on like the second session where we talk about sound systems. By sound systems, I'm talking about like speakers and amplifiers and how the innovations in those kinds of technologies and the sound of disco kind of evolved simultaneously. One influenced the other, and there was a conversation between these two, which results kind of in why disco sounds the way that it does. Next week, at this time, I'll be talking about hip hop, and it's going to be a lot about the performance of a DJ in front of our audience. And we'll be talking about the mixing technology, how you take two records and combine them in a way that allowed hip hop pioneers to innovate. And then in 2 weeks from now, in January 29th, I'll be talking about house and techno, where digital audio to become a real force in both music making and performance. All right, so if you look at this picture that I have over here, this is kind of it's a kind of a hybrid between a traditional and a fairly modern discotheque sound system. It's actually somebody's personal project, and I'm going to be talking about these components that sometimes get ignored a little bit. These panels on the side that you don't see the DJs manipulating so much during a night, but are just as important for the enjoyment of a dance night. Here's the challenge, which is how do you actually play music louder than a room full of dancing people? There are people who are stomping their feet. Maybe they're having a great time and they're shouting and cheering. Some of them are carrying drinks, so there's a lot of clinking around. And just trying to get louder than that, nowadays it doesn't sound so complicated because we have some really efficient audio technologies. But back in the 70s, it was a real challenge to both get loud enough and make it pleasant at the same time, right? How do you motivate people to dance with this music, not make them run away because the sound is so bad? That's the challenge that we're going to be talking about today. And a lot of it is going to revolve around this one guy, David Mancuso, who is an Italian-American New Yorker who was living around at this time, throughout the 70s, and he just passed away, I think, about 4 years ago. And he had this mantra, which is, you don't actually want to hear the sound system. You just want to hear the music. If the sound system makes itself obvious, then you start to lose focus on what's good in the music itself. This was a guy who really, really believed in the power of music to bring a lot of different people together. And he will end up inventing and starting up one of the first underground regular nights before the word disco was invented, but then eventually disco became the name that this kind of sound became associated with. He would say things like, people just want to have a good time. They want to feel safe and have a good time. That's rule number one for a place to be safe. But it's more than not just doing things like overcrowding, which could be a fire hazard. It extends all the way down to protecting the ears. He was very, very concerned about making sure that everybody walked out of a night of dancing without their ears ringing, without suffering permanent hearing damage, because he was so in love with different kinds of dance music that he wanted people to enjoy it for the rest of their lives. He didn't want to cause anyone any harm. So this is the problem, right? We have records. We have these microscopic grooves, 25 micrometers apart. And I talked a little bit about this last week. This is what's inside a turntable needle, what we would call a turntable cartridge. There are a couple of coils of wire, usually copper wire, and underneath that we have a pair of magnets. Each magnet is sort of suspended underneath the coil, and when that metal shaft that has a diamond tip stylus at the end vibrates, those magnets will also vibrate, because the whole thing is sort of like suspended on a hinge, also known as a pivot in this diagram. And when those magnets are moving in close proximity to the coils, that creates an electrical current. It creates a voltage difference, but a very, very, very small voltage difference. We're talking about something like 10 millivolts. It's alternating current, so it's plus 10, minus 10. So maybe there's a 20 millivolt difference. But if there are any electrical engineers in the audience, that's not a lot to work with. And we need to get it, in order to power a speaker, we need to get that up to about 40 volts, plus and minus 40 volts, and drive a whole lot of current behind that voltage. So there's different ways to sort of amplify sound. There's electrical ways, obviously. In the 70s, we're talking about vacuum tubes. And of course, now we can use transistors. But also, we can also acoustically amplify sound by using horns. I have a picture of this iPhone holder, which is connected to this big horn, and it will amplify the sound coming out of the tiny little speakers of an iPhone. In fact, a pipe organ that you would find, in a concert hall or in a church is basically one giant amplifier where each individual note, each individual sound of every note has its own tube that's specifically tuned not only to generate a pleasing sound, but also to make that sound as loud as possible, because it's basically a resonating tube. So for those of you, if there are any electrical engineers in watching right now, please say hi in chat. We are talking about a 72 decibel amplification from all the way from from needle voltage to speaker voltage. So here's a quick refresher on how a speaker works. A speaker kind of works like that turntable needle in reverse. We have a magnet and we have a coil of wire. Only in the case of a speaker, the magnet is usually fixed in place. The magnet is not the thing that's vibrating. And instead we have a coil of wire that's usually wrapped around some sort of tube that's suspended in the middle of that magnet. And when you run alternating current through it, that generates an opposing magnetic force that pushes this cylinder either in and out. And then that cylinder is connected to a cone that's again suspended by some sort of flexible material that pushes in and out as that alternating current changes. Just to remind everybody, when this cone is moving in and out, it's pushing air towards you and away from you. It's actually pressurizing the air. So the air is actually changing in pressure, and that's actually what your eardrum is picking up. You may have seen sound waves. In fact, you're going to see a bunch of sound waves today as I demonstrate different techniques that look like the sound waves bounce up and down. That's just a visualization. Sound waves, in order for you to hear it, have to become low pressure and high pressure, and that up and down is just a graph of pressure. It's not like molecules are actually vibrating upwards and downwards or sideways and sideways. They're actually moving towards you and away from you. That's what a kind of that's what's actually happening when you listen to sound. So hi to Michael. I think that was in response to my electrical engineering question over there. Now, one way that you can make a whole lot of sound is just to add a lot more speakers and amplifiers. And in fact, if the word sound system is often actually associated with Jamaican sound systems, which are outdoor sound systems traditionally. These were known as the people's radio. It was kind of an alternate way of people in Jamaica to hear what they wanted to hear, and for DJs to play what they wanted to play. And you can see on the left, there's actually sort of a record truck, a mobile music store that has a speaker out of it, and you can think of the speaker as being an ad, right, for the music that's actually being sold out of this truck. Well, on the right, we kind of a full-scale Jamaican-style sound system with several dozen speakers, each of which are fed by their own amplifiers. And if you just cram enough speakers together, you can make a sound that's loud enough to be able to traverse miles. This, of course, is not unique to Jamaican sound systems. Does anyone recognize this stage? It's a fairly famous sound system setup, and it's a rock setup. If anyone recognizes which band is behind this, please put it in chat. In this particular case, every instrumentalist has their own stack of speakers. So the bass guitar has a whole bunch of bass speakers. Someone who's playing like the piano will have a whole range of different speakers for the low notes and the high notes. The guitars will have speakers specifically tuned for their frequency, and that cluster of little speakers of what looks like almost 100 different, maybe more than 100 little speakers in the center. That's where all the voices come out. That's where all of the microphones for the singers come out. And these are the Grateful Dead. This setup is known as the wall of sound. And for an outdoor environment, this is a legitimate way to just make sound loud enough so that no matter how many people are dancing or showing up for this rock concert, they'll still be able to hear the music over the people. Now, here's the problem, though, is that once you move indoors, if you had that many speakers in order to be able to get louder than the people, you run out of room to dance. So you need to actually achieve what you can with a minimum number of speakers so that you have as much floor space as possible and people can still enjoy themselves. There are other problems that I will get into acoustically once you move indoors. And that was the problem that needed to be solved before discotheques could really be a thing. So what's the loudest kind of speaker that you can get that doesn't sound like trash? This is a photograph of David Mancuso's loft. This was actually where he would sleep at night. And every weekend, I mean, he started out doing like every month or something, and then it became every Saturday night. He would have these house parties, and people would pay like a very, very small fee to get in, something like 99 cents or something like that. And they would come in, and then he will pay his rent with all of the money that he collected. And so he had these rent parties every weekend. And you can see people are having a great time. You can see it's a diverse crowd. How did he achieve this? He obviously solved this problem. So this is the backbone of what eventually became the very first disco sound system. This is called a Klipschorn, designed by the Klipsch company in America. And it's called a Klipschhorn because it's actually a series of horns. There's one big horn on the top, and at the bottom is what we call a folded horn. It's kind of like a horn that's been folded over itself like an origami shape. It's actually a triangular speaker, so it's flat on the front, and you can see in the picture that I've got, the front will be the left of the speaker. And at back, where you can see all those electrical components, you would tuck that into a corner of, a 90-degree corner of the room. And that will actually turn the entire corner of that room into an extension of that horn. And so we're using both a combination of electrical amplification using some sort of vacuum tube amplifier combined with the actual architecture of the room that you were in to amplify the sound. Here's a picture of David Mancuso, much more recent photo of him sometime in the 2000s. And you can see some adaptations. First of all, you can see two walls that he stuck behind the speaker, again, to sort of reproduce that 90-degree V shape that was necessary to be able to amplify the bass sound. But you can also see there is a wooden structure that brings that top horn even higher over the top of the heads of the audience. And that's necessary because human bodies, they don't really absorb bass sounds that well. And bass sounds tends to flow around people in the same way that AM long wave radio tends to follow the circumference of the earth. Low bass notes, long wavelength sound tends to like go around people's bodies. So even if there's someone between you and the speaker, you'll still hear those bass notes clearly, but you won't hear those treble, those high notes terribly well. And so he elevated it way above the head of all of the dancers, so that everyone has an equal chance to be able to hear those high frequencies, hear those voices and those strings. Without this kind of invention, I think will be very, very unlikely that the sound of disco would have evolved the way that it did, with all of its pianos and all of its high strings and all of its strong diva voices. Like all of these things, we had little bits of this with soul music, but not to the extent that it was encoded into a formula the way how disco eventually evolved. You wouldn't have been, none of that would have sounded good unless we had really high quality speakers delivering all of that sound. Here's a party that he did in the 2000s, but basically patterned after what the Loft had discovered. You can see actually there's a number of different speakers. It's not just two speakers. There's actually 5 in total, and they're kind of arranged in a U shape. All of them have these V-shaped walls, and there's also this cloud of balloons just hanging on top of everybody. And if you look around at this particular scene, you can see that the walls are brick. And these are very resonant walls. They bounce sound around. They don't absorb them terribly well. And there's a problem that we have when we're in a sort of a rectangular or squarish area when sound is bouncing back and forth, especially when it comes to the bass notes. Some of you may be familiar with this idea of standing waves, and that is when a waveform, whether that's light or audio or a water wave, but any kind of waveform goes in one direction and then bounces back in that, in the opposite direction. The incoming wave and the reflected wave start to cancel each other out at various points. And what happens is that at different points of the room, you may have bass that's too loud, or you may have bass that just kind of disappears entirely depending on where you are physically in the room. And that mostly happens when we have these large flat reflective walls that are parallel to each other. So you just have sound waves just bouncing back and forth against each other, and it ends up giving you a very uneven experience. And sometimes different instruments sound too loud, and in some cases different instruments just disappear completely if you don't treat that properly. In bass notes, we have these standing wave problems. In all frequencies, we also have reverberation problems. This is probably quite familiar to anybody who's been in like a large old building or auditorium where sound echoes, right? That's just the effect of sound, not necessarily bouncing back in the same direction that they came from, but sort of bouncing it across multiple surfaces and taking a long time between the first time you hear the sound and the last time you hear the sound hitting your ear. So it kind of slurs out sounds in a way that, that maybe was meant to be short and snappy. So if you have a snare drum, or a hand clap, you want that to be a short, snappy sound, but then in a large enough, echoey enough environment, it becomes this echoey sound. And in some cases, that can be aesthetically very pleasing. But for singing in particular, it can also be very distracting because it makes it difficult for you to hear what the words are all about. If those late reflections, those reflected sounds that come back to your ear that, a long time after that sound has first reached your ear are very loud. So you want to try to be able to dampen that somehow. So this gives you an idea of how this environment is set up. I think the balloons were originally added as a decorative element. David Mancuso's parties have been described as birthday parties for adults. And he really, really wanted to give the sense of, it's a celebration, we're happy, we're here to be with each other. And, the decorative element that he sort of built his entire party around were these balloons. But these balloons also have a side effect in making that ceiling extremely uneven. So we no longer have one big parallel wall, especially the closest parallel wall, which is the ceiling and the floor, facing each other. Instead, we have this very, very uneven, very irregular surface on top. And that does really help break up those waves. Other things that can be done is just proper placement of the speakers. But and you see pictures of kids. He totally had kids there because he really didn't play the music all that loud. He was just loud enough so that everybody could hear the music over each other, but not ear-splittingly painful. And he really encouraged people to bring their kids in, especially during the daytime. Although some of these parties went for like a whole weekend. Nowadays, we acoustically treat a disco with things like absorption material, different kinds of foam, different kinds of fibers. And you will notice, I'm not sure if this is very clear in the image that I'm showing, but it has, we have these sort of panels of acoustic material, and none of them are flat. They're all curved slightly, and they're all facing different angles. And the whole idea is not necessarily to completely remove reflections of sound. Like I said, sometimes reverb can be a very powerful emotional effect. It can make sound, it can make music sound awesome, but it is to break up that reflection so that the reverb that you get from bass hits, from snare drums, and on vocals, it gets diffused very quickly. So you still hear that reverberation, but it's not as loud as as that initial first time you hear the sound. Now you may think that's pretty modern and technologically advanced, but this is actually a paper that was written from a club in the 1980s. This is a document of the Paradise Garage, published by Acoustalog Inc., which is a New York company. And they're already using computers to be able to analyze the reverberation times of different frequencies of sound, and then treating the audio. In the upper right hand corner, there is a blurry photograph of what they had to do to acoustically treat that disco, which are these large V-shaped panels of some sort of sound-absorbing fiberglass. And here's a picture of the Paradise Garage. There's whole, you can see how many people there are. You can still sort of see the disco styling of the space, and I just want to give you a sense of these are the venues that I'm talking about. The Paradise Garage had a very well, not extremely, but it had quite a different goal from the Loft. Like the Loft in David Mancuso's work, he was trying to make music sound as accurate as possible to what was actually on the record, to maybe even convince you that the singers and the band who made this record might actually be in the room, right? It sounds like there's actually a person in this room singing their heart out. The Paradise Garage, on the other hand, was all about trying to immerse people in a sea of sound. It wanted to overwhelm your senses. Again, not damage your hearing. The head DJ of the Paradise Garage, Larry Levan, was a big fan of David Mancuso's Loft. In fact, there are some accounts that he was inspired by what he saw in the Loft to become a DJ in the first place. But he wanted to create an environment where people could just lose themselves completely in the sound. They almost feel like you're surrounded by thousands of people, but you can forget that they're all there because the sound is just sort of wrapping you up like a warm blanket. And so they had to invent some other technologies to be able to make that work. If you look right underneath the disco ball, there's what we call a tweeter array, which is a bunch of tiny little speakers suspended high above everybody's heads. This was actually a technology you can see on the right. The tweeter array idea was actually invented by David Mancuso. He worked with a sound engineer named Alex Rosner to prototype this idea. And most practical sound engineers would have said, look, that's just way too much high frequency information. High frequency speakers are very efficient. Doesn't take a lot of electricity, doesn't take a lot of current to be able to make a very loud sound coming out of high frequency speakers. And if that was pointed at anybody's head, it will become way too painful, too screechy, too quickly. But these speakers were not pointed at anybody. They were above everybody's head. So they were directed at the ceiling. They were directed at the surfaces of the ceiling, and they were meant to bounce high frequency reverberation back down and create almost like a shower of high frequency sound. And as a result, even though human bodies do absorb high frequency information, everyone could still hear those high frequency sounds. On the left, we have another folded horn, a different kind of bass speaker. This is the beginning of the idea of the subwoofer, a speaker that's really designed not to make sounds that you can hear, but sounds that you can feel in your body. Where some people call it sub bass. These are again, maybe round about 20 hertz or so. Really not sounds that your ears are able to pick up, but hairs on your skin can. So the here on the left we have two people. Larry Levan is on the mic, and he's the DJ of the Paradise Garage. And next to him is Richard Long, who was actually a protege of Alex Rosner, the original sound engineer of The Loft. And Richard Long designed the sound system for the Paradise Garage. He took that tweeter array idea and made these really beautiful looking ones that you see up there in the upper right hand corner, made out of steel. And created these horns that you could attach in front of bass speakers. That's the picture on the bottom right. And these horns were called Levan horns. They're named after the DJ of the Paradise Garage to be able to create that those bass frequencies. Another DJ of that time, Nicky Ciano, says that the difference between Alex Rosner and David Mancuso's sound and the Paradise Garage sound. So the Loft was very polished. It was like going to a theater. And the Paradise Garage sound was funky and down home and bassy, right? Now we have the technology to be able to create these sounds and you put them on the record that you don't necessarily hear, but you can totally feel. So this is what a stack of speakers would look like in the Paradise Garage, one of the most technologically advanced discos of the era. Richard Long, I believe, was also involved in the design of Studio 54, but a lot of people remember Studio 54 for other things. Music was only kind of like part of the equation. People remember it for its parties and the celebrities. When it came to the Paradise Garage, everybody remembers the sound. And you can see there's a whole stack of different kinds of speakers. There's the aforementioned bass speakers at the bottom with a huge horn attached to it. Then in the middle, we have these mid-frequency speakers. And then on top, we have an array of different high-frequency speakers. You can see a whole bunch of fins, and that is called an acoustic lens. One thing that you can do, and the diagrams on the right show this, is that when the frequency of sound gets high enough, you can almost sort of aim it and disperse it as if you were sticking a lens in front of a flashlight, and that would allow all of these speaker stacks to spread high frequency sound over a much wider area. Again, because high frequency sound gets absorbed by human bodies, so you have to do everything that you can to be able to make sure that as many people get to hear that as evenly as possible. Now, that's a lot of speakers to have in an indoor environment, and each one of these speakers, and it's usually a group of speakers, will have to have its own amplifier. Here's actually a diagram I think this is the Paradise Garage, but it's certainly a club very much like the Paradise Garage. And you see right in the middle, you have a whole bunch of triangles. Those are the amplifiers. Each one of those triangles is an amplifier, and it's noted how many watts each one of those amplifiers is driving. And each one of those amplifiers is driving its own set of speakers. In some cases, they're driving one speaker. In some cases, they're driving two. Now, we have all of these amplifiers, and all of these need to get their sound from somewhere. It starts on a record. It starts on a turntable. It goes through some sort of audio mixer, which we'll talk about more in next week. But in the middle, we have this thing called the electronic crossover network. And the crossover is a piece of technology that takes one sound source, say the left channel or the right channel on a record, on a stereo record, and splits it into different frequencies. So all the high frequency sounds will go out of one pair of jacks. All the low frequency sounds will come out of another cable, and then all the frequencies in the middle, they'll come out of another cable, and those cables would then be connected to amplifiers. One of the interesting innovations that really changed the way how DJs will will play disco is they, since they needed this crossover technology to be able to just split the sound out into all of these different speaker channels, they could turn those channels on and off. So if I played a song, let me find a song to play. Let's play some Stevie Wonder. Okay, and I'll switch my camera. We'll talk a little bit about isolators. All right. So I'm just gonna play it. I'm just gonna play a song. Are you able to hear that? If you are, chat. Yep. So an isolator is basically a crossover network which allows the DJ to actually turn on and turn off different channels. So right now you are hearing, Stevie Wonder's voice pretty well. You can hear maybe some of the cymbals. And a DJ might start a night just like this, when there aren't that many people in the environment. And as more and more people start to fill up, if they wanted to sort of get a little bit more excitement, they could turn on the bass. So the thing about an isolator is that, I could turn off any of these sounds. Like if I wanted to kill the bass, I'm not sure how many people actually noticed that the bass was missing when I first started playing stuff, but for a lot of people coming into a venue, they don't necessarily notice that the bass speakers aren't even doing anything. And then when they hear it, everybody gets just a little bit more excited. Now you can do the same thing with anything. So if I wanted to make a sort of a breakdown in the music, if I wanted to, let's take the vocals out for a second, I can actually take out the middle frequencies. You still hear the bass, you hear some of the cymbals, but Stevie's voice is gone. And if I had those tweeter arrays on a separate channel, I could make it really loud and create a sound that sounds a bit like this. So hopefully people could actually hear a little bit of that. This technique of isolator play was made possible because of the necessity of having that crossover network just to be able to make the speakers work. And since they already needed this piece of technology, why not put switches on it? Why not put knobs on it and give it to a DJ to manipulate throughout the night? So that's one of the things that started happening. This is very different from soul music and reggae music, which we were talking about last week, where pretty much the records were just played straight. They didn't mess up the records all that much. In the reggae situation, they might add echo effects, for instance, but they wouldn't take stuff out of the recording. They leave that to the studio producers to be able to manipulate. DJs wouldn't take stuff out. But in disco, bringing things in, taking it out on time to create a certain effect is definitely one of those techniques that disco DJs would use. So that's what an isolator is. Over here we have one of those very, very influential DJs from the late 60s going into the disco era, Francis Grasso. And he played at a club called The Sanctuary, and in order to be for him to be able to mix different records together, like having two different turntables like I do, and going from one song to the other, he had Alex Rosner build him a simple mixer. Now mixers had already existed, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what was new when DJs came along, but mixers were already being used in studio production and in radio. This is one that was designed specifically for a discotheque, though. You can see there's a microphone input, and there's two inputs for a turntable. Actually, there's a microphone. Actually, yes, there's a microphone input. There's a tape input for reel-to-reel tape, and 1 and 2, which is the two turntable inputs. But I want you to look at the very upper right-hand corner, which is the Q. And this is actually, I think got a little diagram there. And this would allow Francis Grasso to do something different. Basically, it would redirect any of these channels, maybe the tape, maybe turntable 1 or maybe turntable 2, into his headphones instead of what was being heard out in the audience. And with that, he invented some new DJing techniques. By the way, I've been talking about Alex Rosner all this time. Here's a photo of him, a fairly recent photo of him. And this is in a paper that he writes for the Audio Engineering Society of America. He describes the disco experience as a chariot racing across the desert in wartime that must not stop under any circumstances. And, he wasn't the person who invented this concept. I would argue that Francis Grasso was the one who invented it, because Francis Grasso is the person who invented the technique of beat matching. And the idea of beat matching is pretty simple in concept, which is if you've got two records playing and there's a certain beat, we try to get those beats to play at the same time and in sync with each other, so that when you go from one song to the other, it doesn't sound like one song stopped and the other song started. It sounds like a continuation of that experience. And if you get good at this, you can do this for the whole night long. And through this process, the way how disco songs segue from one song to another and build out the entire night, that formula started to get established. And you needed these sound system technologies for that to actually work. So let me give you an example of that. Now I'm going to take you to right at the end of the 60s. So this is 1970. So this I would still consider either a soul or a funk song. It's the Isley Brothers. It's got a pretty good beat. And it runs at a speed. So, this is the early 70s. We've got rock music that's extremely danceable at this time, like Led Zeppelin, for instance, which is what I'm going to be able to bring in. I talked last week a little bit about cueing. So one thing that I can do while the Isley Brothers are playing is I can put on my headphones and I can try to figure out where the beginning of the next song is. And hopefully you can see the waveforms while I'm doing this. You know what? I'm actually going to turn on what I'm hearing through my headphones, although that's totally not what the audience will ever hear. And I'm going to try to get this second song, the Immigrant Song, to run at the same speed as the Isley Brothers. All right? If you live in darkness, then step my way. That's the first beat. The light of day, then follow me. Girl, let me lead you. Follow me. I want to see you. So I have a little fader at the end that's unfortunately obscured by the edge of my computer over here that allows me to speed records up and slow them down. That's actually a pretty common feature of a 1970s turntable. And the basic design of my turntable also dates back. So if I get to a later part of the Isley Brothers song, and skip forward a little bit. Now, this is pretty tricky to do with music from the early 70s because a lot of this music is being played by live drummers. There are no drum machines, there are no sort of metronomic sync tracks that the drummer is listening to while they're playing. It's all very, very, very funky. Even the rock is funky. But this is what Francis Grasso will do for hours and hours on end. And for the most part, he was doing this with really, really short songs, like 2.5 minutes long before going on to the next song. Of course, he had a couple of longer tracks that he will bring out the LP for, and he'll play them in order to be able to get a bathroom break or something like that. Before I go on a little bit further, do people have any questions? I'm going to change some records while I'm waiting for questions. You can either turn on your mic or type them in chat. The rest of this session, I'm going to just be mostly just playing music so that you get a sense of all of these techniques actually being used in a disco mix. But I do want to show one more technology. Actually, let me switch to the top-down view. All right. Ignore the waveform at the bottom. Right now we've got, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch to a slightly different view. Nah, that doesn't look so good. I'll stick to this view. All right. Over here, I have 2 copies of Chic's Good Times. And over here, I have a 7-inch record running at 45 revolutions per minute, and a 12-inch record running at 33 1/3. You can see this is running slower, and this is running faster, hopefully. This is what a jukebox will play, and you could buy this in stores as well. It's a single, so it's only got 1 song on it. I'm going to make sure that all of my settings are the same for both the left and right. And I want you to hear the difference in sound quality, right? Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. All right, so that's what a 7-inch record sounds like. And now I'm going to switch to a 12-inch single. Again, 1 song per side. All right, same song. Came a bit early. If you can hear any difference in the sound, let me know in chat. We're probably losing a bit of that quality just because of the zoom and audio compression on Twitch. But there's a lot more bass. There's a lot more defined separation between the different instruments. A lot more rounded, that Joanna mentioned. I'm just going to go back to the first record. And now we're back to the 45 RPM. It's also softer. It's actually just, a little bit softer. And the basic reason why we can do this is that a 45 RPM record like this has less surface area. And not only does it have less surface area, it's having to move through that surface area a lot faster. So the distance that we've got between each groove isn't a whole lot. We don't have a lot of freedom to be able to like space the grooves out. If we get closer to the center, then the sound quality really starts to fall off. So there's only a very small amount of workable area. Whereas on a 12-inch record, we have all of this space for one song. Now this is probably a really long version of the song, even. But the 12-inch single, this idea of we're going to take a record and instead of putting 15 minutes of music on it, we're just going to put a 3-minute song. We're going to put a 4-minute song. Allows us to space out those records so much further, and that allows the signal that we're actually feeding into the device that cuts the record to be higher. So the waveforms are physically larger. That being in addition to that, now that we can actually make these wider, wigglier waveforms, sound engineers, music engineers can engineer the sound to take advantage of that. We can have more powerful bass, and it won't like make the needle leap out of the groove, for instance. It's running at a slower rate, so it's less likely it's going to push it out of the groove, and there's more space between grooves. So even if it does bounce out of the groove, it's more likely it's just going to land back in the groove that it's supposed to be in the first place. That's the big difference. This idea of the 12-inch single was invented very specifically for disco DJs who had the sound systems where people could actually hear the difference. Nowadays, of course, it's not that hard to be able to hear the difference. You just heard the difference between the two. And I do have a lot of fondness for these small portable 7 inches, but I have to admit, these do sound better. I'll play more chic later, Joanna. Let's see. Let's see. I have a question from Janice and Gabriel, who are basically asking the same question: is that how do I show the waves on the turntables? And what's the best way to explain this? Here we go. All right. On my normal camera, you can see I've got a blue piece of felt. This is a slip mat. I talked a little bit about this last week when we talked about our turntables. And in addition to the blue slip mat, I have blue records. And these are control vinyl. I was talking with Peter at the beginning. All they are basically putting out a pair of sine waves. It's a real record with a real sound on it, but the sound is just a beep sound, and that tells my computer where I'm going to be playing the music. Then when my camera captures the picture of my turntables, I can just tell it to ignore all of the blue and replace it with part of my software's screen instead. So, hopefully that allows you to see what I'm doing. So if I load in a new song, for instance, I've got to switch this input. There we go. There we go. And now you can see what I'm doing. And I did this, hopefully it's more informative so that you can actually see what it is I'm doing. So what I'm going to do now is, if there are any more questions, now's a great time to ask it. And in the meantime, I'm going to get ready to play an hour of disco. I have some songs that I've lined up. Some of them are very historically significant in sort of the evolution of the disco sound. One of the big things that you're going to hear is that early disco doesn't sound like the disco formula because they haven't figured out the formula yet. But it's funky, it's groovy, and it's and it becomes heavily influential in that evolution of that disco formula. These turntables are Technics SL1200. These are Mark V turntables, but they're very, very, very similar to the Mark II turntables that are probably still the DJ's turntable of choice. They are built like tanks. They survive a lot of abuse. I think the only real difference between like the Mark V and the earlier versions is that it uses LEDs instead of incandescent lights. So yeah, not a huge difference. Okay, what's the best sound system setup that I've ever listened to music on? Huh, that's a really good question. I have to admit that I've heard some really terrible sound systems, systems that are extremely loud but kind of painful to be able to listen to. Um, the best sound system that I've ever personally heard, um, I have to sort of brag a little bit, and I will have to say it's my PA system that I take to my mobile events. But that's partly because I engineered it to my own personal tastes. It's a Yamaha DSR system. It's designed for portable events, and I try to take all of these principles and actually put it into my work. In many places, they don't actually have an engineered sound system. They have very powerful speakers, and they've been hooked up in various parts of the club for convenience. There are places that I would love to be able to visit in Germany, in New York, in England, that have apparently incredible sound systems that I would love to be able to listen to, but I've not had that opportunity, and now it's obviously a really tough time to travel. My personal home system is a Klipsch system as well. Very much influenced by David Mancuso, but it's not the same size of the speakers that he was using. There's no way I could physically fit that in my home. I'm going to put on the album art. Um, I'm going to play "Love Is a Message" from MFSB, which is a band, mother, father, sister, brother. I believe they were recording for Philly International Records at this time. So some of the music that we'll be playing at the beginning, you could call them disco, you could call them Philly soul. And this is one of those records that didn't quite fit the original, the typical soul formula, but became a big hit in that underground loft type party. So here we go. I want you to listen to those drum beats, especially the bass kick. It's not the 4 beats every bar that formula that we will come to associate with disco later. That formula hasn't been established yet. Everything else about this is the strings, the pianos, the saxophone. Really 1970s. I'm glad you're liking this, John. forward in the song a little bit, and this part of the song that we're about to get into, I believe, is the part of the song that actually makes this whole song stand out from all of the other songs of this time. Pete, I use both. I use my ears and I use my eyes, but for the most part I use my ears first. It's just a little bit more practiced. Alright, this is the groove. This is the groove that I love. Just get lost to that. I've got some Danny Krivit edits. Let me see if I can pull them out later. A little bit more African jazz. Soul Makossa by Manu Dibango from Cameroon.
Mosoma.
Fela Kuti is really good and really hard to mix. I will see, but I wanted to run through many other eras of disco, so I think we might not get back to African jazz. Sorry. Fela Kuti is really good for a hip hop, so maybe I'll try to work with it next week. Alright, now listen to the bass drum. Now we have this 4 on the floor, 4 beats, one kick drum for every beat. This marching rhythm starts to establish the Philadelphia formula for disco music.
I can remember planning, building my whole world around you. I can remember hoping that you and I could make it on through, but something went wrong. We loved each other, we just couldn't get along. Take a good look at me, I'm in misery.
huge gospel influence on this track as well.
That's why.
I'd love to hear Theo Parrish mix this actually. So Janice, if you've got like a recommendation of like a stream or something, or a recorded mix of his, please share it. Thanks for joining us, Joanna. Have a great weekend.
I can't remember nothing, no, no, no. But the good time we used to share, my love. I'm so sad and lonely. But without you, my life is so dead. I'm sorry to say, you go your way and I'll go my way. It hurts deep inside. The day we said goodbye, but the love, sweet love, the love I love was complete love, the love I love. I will never, never, no, no, never love again. I will never, never, never love again. Never, never, no, no, never, never love again. Yeah, 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 yeah. Never, never, no, no, never, never love again. No, no, never love again.
Pretty soon there's going to be the breakdown where they strip out instruments. This is a gospel arrangement technique, and then they will slowly introduce each instrument and sort of build that anticipation and that energy. All right, I'm going to like have to mix a song in a different key, so I'm going to have to like take the singer out and bring in a new song in a different key. Hopefully you can still hear the bass.
I never can say goodbye. No, 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 I
Gonna have to make this a little bit faster.
can't say goodbye. Every time I think I've had enough and start heading for the door, there's a very strange vibration kissing me right to the core. It says, turn around, you fool. You know your love is wrong. Tell me why
the first 12-inch single.
I only see you maybe once or twice a week. Once or twice a week.
At least it was the first commercially available 12-inch single.
You treat me like a king. I cherish any time that I can spend with you. Just say the words and I'll do anything that you ask me to. 10% or something. 10% of that something, baby. Something. It means 100% or nothing at all. I got your dad. 10% or something. 10% of that something, baby. Something. It means 100% or nothing at all. I'm not like those guys who try to get all they can. Cause when it's over, they're right back where they began. It's better to have love than never to have love at all. I'm with you till the water runs up, not down. Now have both gone. 10% of something. 10% of that something, baby. It means 100% or nothing at all. I got your dad. 10% of something. 10% of that something. 10% of something. It's better than nothing. 10% of something. I can tell the dad something. Than nothing at all. 10% of something. Now you only see me, baby, maybe once or twice a week. 10% of something. But you treat me, love, just like a dog on a king. Oh, baby, 10% of something. Oh, yeah, just say the word. I'm not like those guys, love. Try to get all they can, girl. I'm gonna be with you till the water runs. Yes, I will. Yes, I will. Oh, baby. Said I cherish, I swear by God. And I try my best to do the best, girl. I need not one, not two, not three, baby. I need 10%.
That was a bit sloppy, sorry about that. 10% just gets faster and faster and faster. So John asks if 10% is the fact that, you know, when you buy a single, you only get 10% of an album. I would say we get a bit more than that because that one song, it's almost 9 minutes long. No, it's 9 minutes 45 seconds long. So we're getting something more like 66%. Janice, yeah, disco is tough because of those live drummers, but at the same time, there's so much funkiness in that it's hard to resist. So I love it, but it's right at the limit of my ability to mix. 10% is a really funny song. Of course, that was Donna Summer and Giorgio Moroder introducing the sound of the future. Now we're going well into Europe. Although Cerrone was working in New York at the time when he made his record, I believe.
The sky was crying. The leaves were falling down. The sky was crying. The leaves were falling down. The sky was crying. The leaves were falling down. The sky was crying.
play a little bit more Giorgio Moroder. At this point, I would say we're well into what we call high energy territory. This is a genre of disco music that was given a name after Donna Summer described I Feel Love as a high energy record in the press. And from then on, this sort of pulsating electronic music it got the name high energy. I hope you're enjoying this mix.
You started this fire down in my soul.
Oh, thanks to Ginny.
Burning out of control. Come on,
Reminder, I have another talk same time next week, and we'll do some hip hop and some scratchy stuff.
Don't you leave me this way, no. Don't you understand? I'm at your command. Oh, baby, please, please don't leave me this way. No, baby, don't leave me this way, no. I can't survive. I can't stay alive without your love. Baby, don't leave me this way. My heart is full of love and desire for you. So come on down and do what you gotta do. You started this fire down in my soul. Now can't you see it's burning out of control? So come on, satisfy the need in me. 'Cause only your good loving can set me free. Set me free, set me free. Need your loving, baby. Need it, need it. Satisfy the need in me.
Yeah, I hope this music is making everyone's afternoon better. Thanks for the kind words, Stefan. Thanks for the kind words, John. These breaks are really important for mixing tracks in and out, but also for hip hop.
Come on, come on, come on, come on. You gotta feel the kind of motion in my soul. You gotta move it. Ooh, I know you're never, 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 never gonna lose control of my fire burning. It's getting real hot. You know that I need me my shot. Run down off the street. And I feel the beat. They throw me out of my seat. I need a hot shot.
Joanna's back. So glad to hear you, to see you back. Hope you had a good meeting.
I'm a street player, and I've seen it all. The hitman thieves and many of all, but don't you see, I'm still standing tall.
It was such a small space to try. Never knew that I would find a musical path for all to see.
Anxiety to ecstasy. I'm a street player. I'm a street player. I'm a street player. I'm a street player.
Yep, I was saving the Danny for a bit. So John was noticing I actually had Chicago on both sides earlier, and part of me was thinking, this song is really long and I wanted to jump ahead a little bit, but then I started grooving to it and it was like, I actually do want to play as much of that song as I can. I changed my mind. Just listening to this track, we can understand how disco turned into house, right? And I will talk about house music in about 2 weeks. And how digital sampling changed the equation for making these sounds. Star Wars, right? Gary's Gang has a lot of really good disco tracks, but I really dig all of these remixes that basically turn into house music. It's a goofy lyric that goes with this song, but let's play the Cribbit version. I'm gonna have to like slow things down a lot, so I'm gonna do like an old disco trick and use sound effects. Right, now we're firmly into roller disco territory. I mean, obviously a lot of the stuff we've been talking about were discotheques, but this also coincided with the big roller skating craze in the 80s all over America. Oh, is outdoor roller skating? Yeah, that would be a feasible thing to do during the pandemic. Outdoor roller skating. I think we should have more outdoor sound systems near roller skating. But they're mostly indoors. And indoor roller skating rinks, especially when they had adult night, which were when the largely African American community could really just strut their stuff and show off all of their most advanced moves. They would turn on all of the disco lights, all the disco balls, fire up the sound systems. And for many people all across America who didn't live in places like New York, big metropolitan areas, was the only club experience that you could get, the reasonable club experience that you can get. It was a huge community center to have a roller disco, and it was a place for personal expression. I'd say I play this again.
said a hip hop, the hip it to the hip hop. You don't stop the rocker to the bang bang boogie. Say up jump the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie to beat. Now what you hear is not a test. I'm rapping to the beat, and me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet. You see, I am Wonder Mike, and I like to sing.
Oh, coming too close to the end of the hour. So just a reminder that I am doing hip hop next week.
I gotta bang bang the boogie to the boogie. Say up jump the boogie to the bang bang boogie. Let's rock. You don't stop, rock the rhythm that'll make your body rock. Well, so
And we'll talk about things like using bass lines from disco to be able to rap on top of it, just like the Rapper's Delight track.
And the OVA and the rest is FLY. You see, I go by the code of the doctor of the mix, and these reasons I'll tell you why. You see, I'm 6'1" and I'm tons of fun, and I dress to a T. You see, I got more clothes than Muhammad Ali, and I dress so viciously. I got bodyguards, I got 2 big guns, I definitely ain't the whack. I got a Lincoln Continental and a sunroof Cadillac. So after school, I take
Thanks to everybody who came in today, and I hope you learned a little bit of something and got some good beats on. And yeah, we'll talk about analog mixers and scratching, all kinds of turntable tricks.
What you gonna do today? Is I'm gonna get a fly girl, gonna get some spank and drive off in a death OJ. Everybody go hotel, motel, holiday inn. You see, if your girl starts acting up, then you take her friend. I'm Master G, my mellow is on you. So what you gonna do?
Well, it's on and on and on and on and on. The beat don't stop until the break of dawn. I said a M-A-S, a T-E-R, a G with a double E. I said I go by the unforgettable name of the man they call a Master G. Well, my name is known all over the world by all the foxy ladies and the pretty girls. I'm going down in history as the baddest rapper that ever could be. Now I'm feeling the highs and you're feeling the lows. The beat starts getting into your toe. You start popping your fingers and stomping your feet and moving your body while you're sitting in your seat. And then damn, you start doing the freak. I said bam, right out of your seat. Then you throw your hands high in the air. You rock it to the rhythm, shake your dairy air. You rock it to the beat without a care. Cruise the short shot MCs for the affair. Now I'm not as tall as the rest of the gang, but I rap to the beat just the same. I got a
All right, everybody have a good weekend, okay?